Hey, good morning, everybody. That was a shot. It was proof of sunshine. The sun does shine from time to time in northern Vermont, and it's a beautiful morning out here today. If I can only get dug out, I might be able to get back to New Haven this weekend, where the practice of law awaits me. But maybe I won't. that sounds good too. Hey, so I got some news on Owen Schroyer last night, and I have a request for help. Owen, as you know, is in federal custody. He is serving a 60-day sentence for his trespassing offenses related to January 6th. And the court imposed sentences on him as a consequence of his political speech. And we've got, an appellate brief pending in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals on that. The government has filed a motion to dismiss, saying he is sentenced within the range of his plea agreement, therefore he can't appeal. Our view is, yes, we can. It's a structural problem. The government can never penalize a person or seek penal consequences on account of speech. We're kind of hoping the D.C. Circuit does dismiss, which will open a clear shot to the United States Supreme Court, which is where we want to get this case as quickly as possible. In any case, that's not the issue that I want to raise for you with Owen right now. I got disturbing news last night and confirmation that of this news. Owen has written to me a couple times. The letters have finally arrived. And then he was in touch with somebody who contacted me last night. And I've learned the following. When Owen first went into the Oakdale facility, he served his time in isolation, which is the protocol for the institution trying to screen out COVID or other infectious diseases. Upon his release from solitary, he spent 7 days there. He made a phone call to a colleague of his, and that phone call was recorded and later rebroadcast to the world at large. Within 18 hours of his release from solitary, he was placed back in solitary. His offense was unauthorized communications with the world, apparently, because his friend recorded the call and then rebroadcast it. Owen's position was, well, I didn't know that was against the rules. The prison system said, well, they are, son, and you're going back into the hole. Well, here's what happened. When Owen first arrived at Oakdale, he started to be inundated with cards, letters, books, and expressions of love and support from people in the world. He had in his possession, just from his first week alone, hundreds of letters, scores of books, and he had begun to write a book. He'd had 30 pages down of his thoughts about what it's like to be incarcerated, what it's like to be an American in these fractious times. That material was his property that the prison recognized was his, was within, his dominion and control, to the degree that anything is really within your dominion and control in prison. But they took that from him before he went into solitary. He's now been released from solitary, and they're claiming they can't find his material or they've not returned it to him. Now, it is a disturbing reality in prison that when prisoners are transferred, they're not permitted to take from one location to another. They're not permitted to take the goods they've acquired with them. And so those of you who have loved ones inside know what happens. Basically friends get your stuff and you trade for, what you can and take with you what is permitted, but it's not much. You leave your property behind. Internally, when you are placed in the hole and removed from general population, it's not as though they keep your bed warm and waiting for you. It's not the Motel 6 after all. It's not Warden Bodette. But he, they hold your stuff.
We'll keep the ride in for you.
That's right. Yeah, we'll keep Bubba warm for you. We'll keep your cell warm and the toilet seat hot, young man. And when you return, you'll have 3 hots and a cot and not much more to show for it. So
Motel J6, we'll keep the ride in for you.
You show some gratitude, son, because the problem here is failure to communicate. I'm Cool Hand Warden, and you're on my turf now, boy. But in any case, they took Owen's stuff, and now he's back, and they haven't given it to him. And here's the problem. The letters that you have written to him are now in the hands of the warden, now in the hands of the prison system. Who knows where they are? The book that he started to write is in the third party's hands. The books you sent him are in a third party's hands. He wants them back, and there's a limited window of time within which to get them back. And so what I am asking those of you who care about Owen to do, we've got on the screen here an address for Owen. I want you to write to Warden, I don't know. We should have put the name up there. We didn't. The warden at the FCI Oakdale 1 Federal Correctional Institution, P.O. Box 5000, Oakdale, Louisiana 71463, in Ray, Jonathan Owen Schroyer, 05937 hyphen or dash 107. Dear Warden, the letter should say, and it needs to say no more than this. Dear Warden, I understand that Owen Schroyer's property has been lost and he is about to be released. Please help him find it. Period. And then send those letters. If the warden gets a couple dozen of those, scores of them, even 100 of them, it'll make a difference. Because when the world is watching, institutions respond. When institutions think no one is watching, they're free to do whatever they like. So if you're following this stream, because of your support for Owen, and you want to be able to do something concretely for Owen Schroyer today, we're asking you to write a letter, and the address is on the screen. I'm not going to read it again, but the letter should be to the warden of the FCI Oakdale 1 Federal Correctional Institution, in Ray Owen Schroyer. Dear Warden, I understand that Mr. Schroyer has been released from solitary confinement. His property has gone missing. Please help him find it. That's all the letter needs to say. Get it out in the mail today. We'll report soon on what happens next. It's the end of the month.
One more time.
At least
I understand that Owen Schroyer has been released from solitary confinement. His what?
His property is missing. Please help him find it.
Perfect.
And get that letter out. It doesn't need to say anything more than that. The warden we need to have 20, 100 of these letters arrive on the warden's desk before Owen leaves, because as the end of the month approaches, his release date will be recalculated. It's currently set, according to the Bureau of Prisons website, for December 18th. My hunch is it'll be the 14th or 15th. So there's only 2 weeks to go before Owen's released. And what if he doesn't have his property when he's released? He's unlikely ever to see it. And I can't tell you the number of times I've heard stories about prisoners' property being lost while they're in confinement. There is a great sock drawer somewhere of stuff that belongs to prisoners in prison facilities, and things disappear into it with great regularity. Let's help solve the mystery, at least as to Owen. So thanks, folks. And report to us on any difficulties you have communicating with the warden. While we're on the topic of Owen, our thoughts turn to Sandy Hook. Brief update on the Alex Jones case. You may have seen stories in the press that Alex Jones is in bankruptcy court, and that the Sandy Hook families who have obtained court judgments of about $1.5 billion against him have offered to settle his claim. That I don't, I'm not part of the bankruptcy team, although I continue to represent Alex on appeal. I have some insight into what's going on. The offer that the families made is hopeful in the following regard. They seem now finally to have stopped being intoxicated by the fumes of the nonsense that they were able to permit or persuade trial judges to let occur in courtrooms. In other words, they were able to tell jurors that Jones was worth hundreds of millions of dollars and that he had these assets. When he went into bankruptcy, they sought to pursue these assets and to prove that he had the means to pay a huge judgment. I think they now realize that's BS, and that that there's no there. And so what they've offered is a 10-year settlement that Alex Jones pays $85 million over the course of 10 years, $8.5 million. In settlement of these claims. It could be more if he comes into a great deal of money. He'd have to pay 50% more of anything he made, over $9 million a year. These kind of numbers are still out of reach for Jones, but they represent pennies on the dollar and the first real sign of progress in the Sandy Hook cases. I'm not sure how Jones's bankruptcy lawyers will respond to this offer, but it is hopeful. And what's hopeful is that the Sandy Hook families, who thus far have, and their lawyers, who thus far only earned legal fees incident to the bankruptcy. I don't know who's paying them. The Sandy Hook families have yet to see a dime, and realistically may never. If this settlement is not accepted, or some alternative settlement is not arrived at, the families have it within their power to convert this voluntary bankruptcy into an involuntary bankruptcy, and they can force InfoWars to liquidate. Alex will go on with his broadcasting career in a different iteration, and it'll be an iteration that is beyond the reach of his creditors. Texas has a very generous homestead provision, so he'll keep his home, he'll keep his vehicles, and there are ways in which a person can be compensated for their activities that are unreachable by a bankrupt creditor, or a creditor, who's a judgment creditor. I didn't mean a bankrupt creditor. And so we're likely to see a very uneasy standoff unless a settlement is reached. So I hope the parties can come together to reach a settlement. If not, I'm more than ready, willing, able, and eager to argue Alex's appeal in the Connecticut appellate courts. The issues have been fully briefed, and we await assignment for argument. It's a case that will be litigated at the appellate level for years. One of the primary issues being whether the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act permits a plaintiff to sue a person for their speech when the speech is unrelated directly to the sale of a product. In other words, Jones said Sandy Hook's was a hoax, and he sold health nutraceutical products to support his broadcasting enterprise. He didn't falsely induce anybody to purchase a nutraceutical. He didn't make false claims about the nutraceuticals. The speech that he was penalized for was unrelated entirely to the nutraceuticals. How, then, as a matter of law, does this become an unfair trade practice? That's among the issues that we look forward to litigating. So
nothing like having a $1.5 billion judgment in your favor and starting the bidding at $85 million over a 10-year period.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that the plaintiffs needed to make a point, and they made it. And in the
or the judge, but we'll set that aside.
In the national debate over hate speech, Jones looms large, and this verdict is a symbolic victory. The cash value of it is de minimis, and it would be great if the case were resolved. But while we're talking about cases, what's up with the Atlantic, Mike? I mean, who is the editor of the Atlantic right now? And should we be saying prayers for that person's mental health?
I don't know who the editor is, but to your second question, yes. Yeah.
Take a look at the story today. The case that could destroy the government, as though that would be a bad thing. I mean, but I'm scrolling through my feed this morning and I see that and I'm like, ooh, yeah, what's that? And it turns out it's an old case, an old legal issue that you've heard us talk about here before, involving the so-called non-delegation doctrine. A fellow named, I think his name is Jarkesy, a blogger and investment, Jarkesy, excuse me, an investment advisor, ran afoul of the SEC. He was apparently not just opining, as people do, aka Mike and moi, but also offering financial services. And the SEC found that the financial services were fraudulent.
First of all, I mean, what are we doing, Norm? Look at this. Conservative talk radio host, and ran a pair of investment funds with $24 million in assets. I don't think that those two things are necessarily related, but if they are, we need to recalibrate,
Well, no, look, folks, I'm here to tell you, if you want to get rich quick, send Mike and I $199.95, and we will provide you with private, confidential legal advice and advice on how you too can triple your earnings in the stock market by investing randomly in things that we and you know nothing about. And if you could take a subscription for $50 a month, we'll even double down and we'll tell you about real estate deals that don't exist. And you can become wealthy by following our foolproof, no holes barred pyramid scheme. I mean, and that may be unfair to Mr. Jarkesy. I have no idea what he was doing, none. But the SEC, however, was furious. They felt that he was offering securities to a public that was unprepared and unsophisticated to understand that they were being dealt with fraudulently. They fined him and they barred him from the sale of securities for life. All activities which fall within the enforcement power of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Mr. Jarkesy struck back. He didn't say that they made errors of law and fact in their administrative findings. He challenged the ability of the administrative state to regulate him at all, and brought back to life an old legal doctrine that was last litigated seriously in the 1930s and 40s, the so-called non-delegation doctrine. The Fifth Circuit, I believe it was, Court of Appeals, took him seriously and sided with him 2-1. And now the Supreme Court will hear the case, SEC versus Jarkesy. Keep an eye on it. Last year at the beginning of this year at the beginning of the year, Mike and I made some predictions and talked about issues that we would follow during the course of the year that would significantly define the shape of the lives that you and I live on a day-to-day basis. And one of them had to do with the development of the public health state, the development of an administrative apparatus at both the state and federal level that had the power to regulate how we live, to tell us what's in our own best interest, what's good for us, as it were. The non-delegation doctrine is a direct threat to the administrative state or to the public health state, and it goes something like this. If you look at the Constitution as framed, it talks about a separation of powers within the federal government. There's an executive branch that enforces the law, a legislative branch that creates law, and a judicial branch that determines and decides disputes about the law and its application. Nowhere within the Constitution is there an administrative agency, is a fourth branch of government. And so the claim is that when Congress delegates its powers broadly to administrative agencies within the executive branch, and says in effect, make sure that the investors aren't taken advantage of, make sure the air is clean, make sure the water is clean, make sure X is done, and yields to the administrative agency the ability to decide how to do that. That's an impermissible move. That's the argument in the so-called non-delegation doctrine, that Congress doesn't have the power to delegate its lawmaking authority, its authority to make generally binding rules on all of us. It doesn't have the power to delegate that responsibility to an administrative agency and simply paper over the lawmaking function by calling it rulemaking. So, administrative agencies don't make laws, they make rules, and those rules are tethered to broad congressional purposes. Jarkesy's claim is that in this game, it's possible, and in this case, it occurred, and at least two judges on the Fifth Circuit agreed with Jarkesy, that when Congress delegated a power to regulate a market in securities, it gave to the SEC more power than it had to give away. That under the separation of powers doctrine, it's a conceit simply to say that when an administrative agency makes a rule you have to follow, it's not making a law. It really doesn't matter to you whether it's called a rule or a law when the jackboot of the government is on your neck telling you what to do and how to do it, and telling you that if you don't do it, you're going to be fined, imprisoned, or put out of business. Call it a rule, call it law. It's an imposition on your liberty. And in Jarkesy's suit against, or claim against the SEC, he struck broadly. The SEC is itself unauthorized as a matter of law, as an impermissible delegation of Congress's lawmaking ability to an administrative agency. The Atlantic has wet itself over this. This will be the end of the republic. This will be the end of life as we know it. Oh my God, what will we do if left to ourselves and have to decide how to cope with our own lives and be responsible for them without Big Brother's velvet glove over our mouth? We might live free and die. Which you live free or die. Those of us in New England recognize that as the motto on the New Hampshire license plate. That license plate would be regarded as hate speech in California. Live free or die. Oh my God, I don't want to die. I want to live forever. Well, no one does. It's appointed unto men, the good book says, once to die, and after that, the judgment. And in a government of limited powers, we have significance in our own skins and purpose of our own, and the ability and right to breathe freely and to decide for ourselves what to do. Does that mean that we should abandon any collective response to the world at large? Well, obviously not. We do and have for centuries.
Norm, that's right. This isn't about. I love the headline. Of course, I need to scroll back up here. The case that could destroy the government. I mean, imagine writing that headline as a serious person.
Oh, right? It worked. It got me in there, and I'm like, yeah, how do I sign on?
Government. And what I love most about this article is sort of how tone deaf it is to the current state of economic affairs in the country, right? And so we'll get to that in a moment. But the notion of the delegation doctrine here, it's necessarily the case that the Constitution actually constrains any regulatory or administrative agency's powers. And it does that in two ways, right? It does that to protect individual rights, our rights as citizens, but also it protects the prerogatives of the other branches of government, Norm, right? So the non-delegation doctrine should not be read to be synonymous with destruction of the government. It is necessarily the case that, yes, individual rights are protected by and through the constraints of the administrative agency at bar, but also that administrative agency necessarily has the power to impinge and infringe on the prerogatives of the other co-equal branches of government, to which, right? So Congress made a delegation of authority to a certain branch or agency, but the executives still have an interest in issues, and the judiciary, most importantly, let's think about, what is it? Due process? I don't know, quaint notion of due process, but certainly that is the case here. And I just love that Noah Rosenblum has just gone off the deep end saying that, this case, by reining in the SEC, right, which has absolutely no credibility in the modern era with respect to digital assets and the technology of money, right? The interneting of money. We're talking about an agency that has zero track record of effective enforcement. Now, I will say, as a public policy objective, I agree with you, Norm. I think that we do need competent people staffing these agencies to guard the public interest, to guard the average person who is not an accredited investor from being from being led astray, right? From being defrauded by those in our society who would see to their demise to their own personal gain, right? That's a very, very clear line. However, this case is not about destroying the entire government.
No, it's not. It's a ridiculous piece of hysteria. Those of you who see me struggling with my headphone will realize that I'm here with my border collie, Athena, who's tugging at it and saying, it's time for you to go out and play. It's not, Athena. Sit, be a good border collie, show the world that you too can follow instructions, or I'll sick the SEC on you. No, I mean, we've lost track somehow of something fundamental in the political turn we've taken in the last 10 to 15 years with its great stress on victimhood and identity. There are structural issues that are significant and require litigation on a generation by generation basis. And one of them are the limits to governmental power. Now, the Atlantic piece ridicules the concern with the non-delegation doctrine as an artifact of the Federalist Society and the cancer that it has imposed on the judicial branch, which is, going on a conservative toot, and who really cares about originalism and the founders. Well, the fact of the matter is that these constitutional doctrines play a significant role in how cases get decided, and how cases get decided plays a significant role in determining how you can live your life. And if you want to just tap dance to the tune that the public health state says, mask up, vax up, social distance, and, pay your reparations and, send aid to Gaza and Hamas and whatnot. If that's the kind of state that you want, well, then, okay, just abandon the Constitution and move to China.
Or Canada.
Or Canada. Yeah. Oh, God, don't even talk to me. Okay, I can see into Canada from here. The air is still free, but I don't think the people are. I mean, if you want to be ruled by a weenie like Justin Trudeau, we've got a solution for you. Emigrate, leave. But don't come here and bring the ethics of collectivism to our front door and expect us to say that we want to be healthy, happy widgets for a living for the greater good. American government was designed to be inefficient. It was designed not to have an answer for everything. The presumption was that individual people should have answers and come to answers for themselves because, and this is our transition to the next topic, people want a sense of purpose and significance in their own life. Deprive them of that and they become miserable. Would you rather live free or die? It's a sort of false dichotomy. I think people simply want to be able to say, I'm making a choice about how to spend my limited resources in life, my time, my money. I'm making in what it is that I choose to value. So we find this story I think it was in the Wall Street Journal this morning. Why is everybody so unhappy at work right now? And the author struggles to talk about the post-pandemic workplace and to determine why it is that people aren't happy at work. And the article seems to miss a larger point, Mike. It seems to miss the point that it's not the workplace. It seems to me that's created a nation of discontents. It's the culture. The workplace takes place within the culture. But what did you see in the article, Mike? We were debating this morning whether purpose or significance was the right fulcrum. I'm not so sure it's a distinction with difference, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So the statistics obviously are what jump out to me probably most here. And in particular, I think we've have a 10% drop in satisfaction scores from I guess a poll of 57,000 Gallup poll of 57,000 workers in this year alone, right?
What does it even mean to it? Are you satisfied at work? I mean, what does that question mean?
Well, and I don't know that this article should be read without the backdrop of the pandemic, right? Because I think what has happened in subsequent to the pandemic, and more particularly or more specifically, subsequent to state and federal government measures to force people inside, to constrain freedom of movement, to inflate the money supply, to pay people to stay home, right? To furlough employees, create perverse loan incentives for businesses, which has resulted in fraud. We are watching, normal day to day people are watching organized and patterned theft rings all across the country, particularly in densely populated municipalities. And we're watching store closures. We're watching rising crime. We're watching prosecutions plummet, right? There's no accountability for sort of the criminal conduct of those perpetuating it.
Prosecutions for theft plummeting, but prosecutions for unpopular opinions increasing. Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Well, and of course, we're saying the same thing. And what I believe is happening with this is that people have the chickens have come home to roost, so to speak, right? On this issue of incentivizing laziness and incentivizing people to not participate, and and people now drawn back into the workforce are displeased with the fact that their life was substantially the same while the government was underwriting their do nothingness, right? And as such, there is a complete disconnect or a dislocation of purpose and meaning in one's day-to-day life on average, right? Because of the contrast to the lifestyle that was incentivized and perpetuated at a state and federal government level for a couple of years, right? And our economic stance geopolitically has changed. Things. Does anybody remember the stock market craze during the pandemic? GME, or GMC, AME, or AMC, GME, right? Every Reddit, the Reddit craze, all these things have popped up in the last couple of years, and it seems as though it's like a 10 or a 20-year span norm. But really, we've only been, it's only been a couple of years since this stuff really was happening in a way that we will never forget. But I believe that young people who are already starved of purpose, right, in the modern era of what, big E education, the business of education, I believe that people who were already in the workforce have woken up and realized that what they do has been so particularized and so fractionalized that it doesn't actually matter to the overall whole. And I do believe personally that people need to feel as though their effort as applied to their day-to-day matters in some respect. That is what I mean by purpose.
So I want to go follow up on something you said, because I see an echo of it here in New England. And that is that folks wonder about the value and meaning of work, and returning to it, because their lives don't really change. When they were dependent on the government, they had what they have when they work. So why work for it? If you can't give it to me, if I can't enjoy the universal basic income that we were habituated to begin to receive in the course of COVID, if you give it to me, why should I work for it? And what I see in Vermont is a real difficulty filling entry level positions, or manual positions, or positions as baristas in a coffee shop, or clerks at a McDonald's. And the result is we have store closings and businesses closing because people aren't returning to the workforce. And I look around me and I wonder, how are these people living? If the government dole is ending as we reopen the private economy, and folks are refusing to return to it because why should I work when the government wasn't supporting me? Or when the government was supporting me, rather, I lived a certain quality of life, and it's no better when I work. Why can't I go back to being supported? I think the answer has to be not what the Atlantic says. You're destroying government. The answer has to be recreating private incentive, and maybe destruction of the government is the way to do it. I mean, there was a hysterical story reported this week online. Miguel Cardona is the federal secretary of education. He comes from Connecticut, so I take a certain proprietary interest in his idiocy. And he got up, to say, I think it was Ronald Reagan that says, "I'm here from the federal government and I'm here to help." Well, he recalled part of the speech, but he didn't recall the words as in their
I
context.
saw
What
this.
government, what Reagan says is the most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help." But this idiot at large running the education department only heard, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." And what he's done is help a bunch of people into a sense of lassitude such that they no longer see the efficacy of working. If when I work I'm no better off than when I was on the dole, well then give me the dole every time. And we're afraid somehow to say to people, we'll provide a safety net for those who are trying, but if you're not trying, we don't have a responsibility to carry you. I saw another interesting statistic yesterday that we've spent an enormous sum in the United States. I don't know if it's 451 billion, but it was a big number, caring for unlawful immigrants. And I played with that number in my mind, and I thought, what would happen if every American had those funds at their disposal, either as a direct grant, which is what I think those in the land of lassitude want. Why work when you can support me? Or in the alternative, if we just didn't tax people to that extent and said to folks, when you come here, we're not guaranteeing you 3 hots and a cot. We're guaranteeing you an opportunity to succeed in a land that experiments with liberty. And what we've ended up with now is a political culture that says to the world's refugees, "Come on down, we'll support you." And we're seeing pushback in local communities as people begin to reckon the cost. So I take a look at the Wall Street Journal
And
story.
a final thought here. A final thought here is I think that I would be remiss if I didn't at least examine sort of the philosophical or the spiritual aspect of this. And it is, I talked about the direct impact of state and federal initiatives, right? Closure of stores and private businesses, the restriction on freedom of movement and travel, the masking, the coercion towards taking experimental vaccines, and the rush to approve these things while also censoring information for people to make choices of their own volition and in their own best interest. Basically, what I'm getting at is we have run through a very quick 48 months thereabout of intense collectivization of the individual, right? Of the individual interest and identity. The top-down message across every sector, if you step back and really examine it, has been a complete collectivization, a complete subversion, in other words, of the individual as the sovereign unit of our republic. It has been, masked to protect other people, take the vaccine to protect other people, stay home to protect other people. By the way, you may not visit your loved one in the hospital. You may not visit your daughter as she delivers her first child. You may not travel. You may not stand this close to people in the grocery store. Everything has been a complete subversion of that real world lived experience, that the essence of community and the volition of the individual to make and do and see as he or she sees fit. And to that end, why would workplace morale be anything but what we're seeing with this Wall Street Journal article, Norm,
That's a
right?
great point. And then, folks, take a look at it and ask yourself in your own life: would you rather be significant, or would you rather live with the illusion of immortality? It is appointed unto men once to die, and after that the judgment. And along the way, you make judgments about yourself and about the sort of life you want to live. I'm not yielding mine to Big Brother. I'm not yielding mine to the SEC. I'm not yielding mine to government. I'm not yielding mine to the public health state. I want, as we've said before, every dystopian novel you read, 1984 Orwell, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451, all of them have as a structure an ethos, a society where the rules for what it takes to be secure and to live a decent life within the contours of that society are well established. All an individual has to do is go along, and they'll get along just fine. But for the protagonists in each of these stories, the protagonist says, it's not good enough for me to go along to get along. I want to make my own choices, even if those choices end up in my destruction. And that's because I realize that collective entities are fallible and that there's something indestructible about the human spirit. And I'm not going to permit mine to be destroyed. And so, there is the rejection of the patriarchal society in The Handmaid's Tale, the decision to think freely in Bradbury's 451, and to regard books as vehicles of freedom rather than things that threatened collective security, the desire to tell Big Brother and disinformation no in 1984, and a rejection of the feel-good pleasures of Soma in Huxley's Brave New World. We are living in dystopian times, and there is the promise of collective and fantasy of collective security, and it's reflected in magazines, frankly, like The Atlantic. Our headline for this piece is Kennel Nation. The Atlantic writes about SEC versus Jarkesy. What do we mean by Kennel Nation? If we all live happily in the kennel and yap when we're told to yap and eat the calories that the World Economic Forum tells us are necessary for our survival, even if we're eating insects, if we all do things and live by the script and the program, we can maximize utility for the greatest number of people and live a decent enough life. A decent enough life according to whom? I'm not asking for somebody to set the metes and bounds of how I live. I'm asking for the ability to make those decisions for myself. Sometimes they'll be good decisions, sometimes they'll be bad. But the significance of every protagonist in every dystopian novel is they're the decisions of the protagonist. And I think what we're seeing, Mike, in the story about the workplace, the Wall Street Journal story, is that people are only half awake. They're unhappy with the fact that they have to give in order to get. They're used to just receiving without having to give. But what you give in life existentially is what you get. And if you give a great effort into self exploration, creation of a better world, you'll live in one. If you yield the responsibility to make those choices for yourself, you'll end up in a dystopian nightmare in work that you can't abide.
And perhaps the reason everybody is so unhappy at work has been the subtraction of meaning from their life, right? I mean,
They're not listening to Law and Legitimacy. I mean, I think clearly there's an existential crisis in the world.
one more time, tell them, what do we do?
So look, a shout out for Owen Schroyer today. Some of you who are listening because of your concern for Owen. Some of you will find this show because you'll see the piece on Owen. Owen is going to be released in a couple weeks, but his property has gone missing, and he is internally trying to recover it. But the administrative mechanism within a prison system moves at this, glacially at a slow pace. It's not used to people being in and out in 60 days. It's used to holding them for decades. And why solve a problem today that you can put off for 3-4 years? Owen's problem is urgent. The books, letters, and material that you sent him was taken from him when he was replaced or placed back into solitary, and the prison system is claiming it can't find it. We want you to write a letter to the warden at the Oakdale at FCI Oakdale 1, Federal Correction Institution, Post Office Box 5000, Oakdale, Louisiana 71463. It's a simple letter. Dear Warden, I understand that Owen Schroyer has been released from solitary confinement. His property is missing. Please help him find it. If that warden gets 100 or 200 or 300 or 1,000 letters on his desk this week, I'll bet you that the prison officials can find the lost socks. They can even find the sock drawer. They just need a fire lit under them in order to get it done. Help us get it done for Owen, because once he's released, he'll never get his property back at all. And among those items of property are things that you folks sent him.
Last thing here is we have a special guest in the chat.
Yo, who do that be?
Oh, Pete.
Hey, Pete and Repeat. How are you? We've missed you, buddy. You folks, if you're not listening to the Merry Beggars, you are really missing an opportunity to experience the gift of grace. The Merry Beggars is creating a program, or has created a program about saints in our world, saints being people who responded to the call for mercy and grace in outsized ways and whose lives ripple well beyond the significance of themselves to themselves. But they created instruments through which we can begin to understand a divine purpose in the world in which we live. And I know some of you are thinking, divine purpose? What's Norm been reading? Shirley MacLaine? No, I've been reading the Bible, that talks about us not as products of chance, but as created in the image of God, and that until we find our rest in Him, as Augustine once said in the Confessions, we will know no rest at all. That's an eternal message that never loses its urgency, never loses its individual significance. Pete Atkinson is rapidly becoming a saint in our time. We've got his a link to the Merry Beggars on there. I'm urging each of you to give it a listen. It may not change your life because you may be too thick-headed and stubborn to open your ears and eyes to what's ever present around you. It's a world of wonder, a world created, not arrived at by chance. And we are the pinnacle of that creation. Its creator has given us the ability to choose, and we often choose to love the wrong things, and we come to regret it and become lost in the tangled web of that our own sins make of our lives. But guess what? If you can respond to the call of grace, you can be born again. And I'm not talking about popping back into mom's womb and having to come out again with pablum on your lips and whining. Although whining is good, I do it here all the time. What I'm talking about is seeing the world through new eyes, seeing the world as a gift that was given to you by a creator, and understanding that a response with love and gratitude to the call of grace, and it's there if you'll but listen, could change your life for the better and provide you with a sense of purpose that you'll never get listening to Big Brother. So welcome back, Pete. We've missed you.
We have, and we will certainly make an effort to get Pete on to talk about everything that he's doing through the Merry Beggars. I am really enjoying watching this journey. Pete, I have such an admiration and respect for you as a creator, as a producer, as somebody who is putting something new and good and genuine and such a light in the world. So thank you. Maybe that's a great way to end this stream, which has been focused mostly on the void and the vacuous nature of a modern existence. Pete, thank you for continuing to invest in community.
All right, folks, we'll be back tomorrow. At least I hope to be. I'm looking out. There's sunshine, but clouds on the horizon. I'm in Vermont, where if it doesn't rain, it snows. And I'm hoping to get out of here this week. I'll keep you posted.
Sounds good. All right, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. If Norm isn't able to get out, but he's stuck in a car or a tractor or something like that, we'll still have him call in.
It's the call of the mild. Take care, folks. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.